Imagine waking up one morning in the year 536 AD to find the sun dimmed, casting only a ghostly glow across the land. Birds are silent, crops don't grow, the skies stay grey for months. You'd think the end of the world had arrived, and for many it nearly did. The year 536 AD is considered by many historians and climatologists to be the worst year to be alive in human history. Why? Because a mysterious veil fell over the earth, blocking sunlight and plunging much of the world into a cold, dark, and hungry time. But what exactly happened that year to send the entire planet into crisis? Historical records across continents from Byzantium to China, from Ireland to Mesoamerica tell a chilling story. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and that a shadow covered the earth for more than a year. In Ireland, the annals record a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539 Chinese. Chronicles speak of summer frosts and failed harvests. But this was no ordinary drought and no mere famine. Something much larger and more terrifying was at play. Modern science has helped solve the mystery. All signs point to a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, or perhaps multiple eruptions that occurred somewhere near the equator. Iceland and Central America are among the prime suspects. These eruptions released enormous volumes of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. The result? A thick layer of aerosols that wrapped around the globe, blocking sunlight, cooling temperatures, and creating what scientists now call a volcanic winter. This wasn't just a day or two of bad weather. This was a climate catastrophe that stretched over the better part of a decade. Temperatures dropped by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius in the northern hemisphere. Crops failed across Europe and Asia. Famine spread. Populations were weakened, and in many regions, disease followed close behind. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica have confirmed the timeline. Layers of volcanic debris, dated precisely to 536 AD, show a sudden and massive spike in atmospheric sulfur. This was followed by another spike in 540 AD, suggesting a second eruption, compounding the misery. The twin volcanic disasters of 536 and 540 kicked off one of the coldest decades in the past 2 millennia. The environmental chaos had ripple effects across civilizations. In the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, Justinian's dreams of reconquest were stalled. Military campaigns were delayed, cities suffered food shortages, and the empire's stability teetered. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the great city of Teotihuacan collapsed shortly after these climate events. In Scandinavia, population centers shrank, with some scholars suggesting entire villages were abandoned due to the failed harvests and starvation. But the horror didn't end there. Just a few years later, in 541 AD, a deadly new threat emerged: the plague of Justinian. This bubonic plague swept across the Mediterranean world, killing millions. Weakened by famine and cold, populations were especially vulnerable. Some scientists now believe that the 536 volcanic winter directly contributed to the spread of the plague. By driving rodents closer to human settlements and increasing susceptibility due to malnutrition. So, what can we learn from this dark chapter in human history? First, that even in ancient times, global disasters could reshape the fate of civilizations. Second, that human survival has always been intertwined with the natural world when nature lashes out. Societies either adapt or collapse. And finally, that even the darkest winters eventually give way to spring. By 550 AD, the skies had cleared. Temperatures slowly rose. Crops began to recover. But the echoes of 536 AD lingered for centuries in legends, in ruins, in the silence of vanished towns. Some cultures would remember it as a divine punishment. Others would forget it entirely. But now, through the lens of science and history, we are beginning to piece together the truth. The year 536 was not the end of the world, but it was a harsh reminder of how fragile our world can be. Imagine waking up one morning in the year 536 AD to find the sun dimmed, casting only a ghostly glow across the land. Birds are silent, crops don't grow, the skies stay grey for months. You'd think the end of the world had arrived, and for many, it nearly did. The year 536 AD is considered by many historians and climatologists to be the worst year to be alive in human history. Why? Because a mysterious veil fell over the earth, blocking sunlight and plunging much of the world into a cold, dark, and hungry time. But what exactly happened that year to send the entire planet into crisis? Historical records across continents from Byzantium to China, from Ireland to Mesoamerica tell a chilling story. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and that a shadow covered the earth for more than a year. In Ireland, the annals record a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539 Chinese. Chronicles speak of summer frosts and failed harvests. But this was no ordinary drought and no mere famine. Something much larger and more terrifying was at play. Modern science has helped solve the mystery. All signs point to a cataclysmic, volcanic eruption, or perhaps multiple eruptions that occurred somewhere near the equator. Iceland and Central America are among the prime suspects. These eruptions released enormous volumes of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. The result? A thick layer of aerosols that wrapped around the globe, blocking sunlight, cooling temperatures, and creating what scientists now call a volcanic winter. This wasn't just a day or two of bad weather. This was a climate catastrophe that stretched over the better part of a decade. Temperatures dropped by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius in the northern hemisphere. Crops failed across Europe and Asia. Famine spread. Populations were weakened, and in many regions, disease followed close behind. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica have confirmed the timeline. Layers of volcanic debris, dated precisely to 536 AD, show a sudden and massive spike in atmospheric sulfur. This was followed by another spike in 540 AD, suggesting a second eruption, compounding the misery. The twin volcanic disasters of 536 and 540 kicked off one of the coldest decades in the past 2 millennia. The environmental chaos had ripple effects across civilizations. In the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, Justinian's dreams of reconquest were stalled. Military campaigns were delayed, cities suffered food shortages, and the empire's stability teetered. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the great city of Teotihuacan collapsed shortly after these climate events. In Scandinavia, population centers shrank, with some scholars suggesting entire villages were abandoned due to the failed harvests and starvation. But the horror didn't end there. Just a few years later, in 541 AD, a deadly new threat emerged: the plague of Justinian. This bubonic plague swept across the Mediterranean world, killing millions. Weakened by famine and cold, populations were especially vulnerable. Some scientists now believe that the 536 volcanic winter directly contributed to the spread of the plague. By driving rodents closer to human settlements and increasing susceptibility due to malnutrition. So, what can we learn from this dark chapter in human history? First, that even in ancient times, global disasters could reshape the fate of civilizations. Second, that human survival has always been intertwined with the natural world when nature lashes out. Societies either adapt or collapse. And finally, that even the darkest winters eventually give way to spring. By 550 AD, the skies had cleared. Temperatures slowly rose. Crops began to recover. But the echoes of 536 AD lingered for centuries in legends, in ruins, in the silence of vanished towns. Some cultures would remember it as a divine punishment. Others would forget it entirely. But now, through the lens of science and history, we are beginning to piece together the truth. The year 536 was not the end of the world, but it was a harsh reminder of how fragile our world can be. The year is 541 AD, just 5 years after the sky darkened and the crops failed. Another shadow begins to creep across the Byzantine Empire. But this time, it's not clouds, it's not famine, it's death swift, silent, and unstoppable. This is the beginning of the plague of Justinian, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. At the height of the Eastern Roman Empire's power, as Emperor Justinian I pursued his grand vision of reunifying the Roman world, a microscopic invader derailed everything. The empire had already suffered under the volcanic winter of 536 AD. Crops had failed, people starved, trade was disrupted, and just as the empire began to recover, the plague struck. The first signs came from the port's jot ships arriving from Egypt, particularly the bustling hub of Pelusium near the Nile Delta, carried not only grain and goods, but fleas and rats, infected with a bacterium known today as Yersinia pestis. It spread through the Mediterranean with terrifying speed, reaching Constantinople in 541 or 542 AD. What followed was chaos. Eyewitnesses in Constantinople, the glittering capital of the empire, describe scenes of horror. At the peak of the outbreak, 5,000 to 10,000 people died every day. The dead piled up in the streets. Entire households perished overnight. Cemeteries overflowed. Workers were paid to dig mass graves, but even they succumbed to the disease. The symptoms were gruesome. Victims suffered from fever, chills, delirium, and swollen lymph nodes or buboes, which oozed and blackened. Death often came within days. Physicians, priests, and the poor all suffered equally. The disease showed no mercy and made no distinction. Contemporary historian John of Ephesus wrote that the city was like a world turned upside down. There were so many corpses that Emperor Justinian ordered bodies to be buried at sea or stored in underground cisterns. The stench of death hung over the empire's heart, and then Justinian himself fell ill. Though he would survive the disease, his empire never fully recovered. The plague disrupted the imperial bureaucracy, crippled the military, and shattered the economy. Tax revenues vanished as populations declined. Farms were abandoned. Trade collapsed. Justinian's once mighty ambitions to rebuild the Roman Empire, to conquer Italy, North Africa, and beyond faltered in the face of pestilence. But this wasn't just a Byzantine problem. The plague of Justinian was the first recorded pandemic in human history, spreading across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe. It's estimated that the plague may have killed 30 to 50 million people, nearly half the population of the affected regions. In some cities, entire communities disappeared. Cultural centers went silent. Ports turned into ghost towns. Modern science has confirmed that Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that would later cause the Black Death in the 14th century, was responsible. DNA evidence from ancient graves proves the connection. But what made this outbreak especially catastrophic was the timing. The plague came on the heels of global famine and climate crisis, a world already weakened by disaster. Imagine being a peasant who survived the cold and hunger of 536 to 540. Just as hope returns and crops begin to grow again, your village is struck by a mysterious illness. The neighbors fall. Your children develop strange swellings. Your fields go untended. And soon, you're alone. Across Europe and Asia, the social order crumbled. Cities depopulated. Trade routes shrank. Armies disbanded. In some areas, the plague returned in waves, striking again every 10 to 15 years for more than 2 centuries. This cyclical devastation prevented meaningful recovery, prolonging what many call the late antique Little Ice Age. For the Eastern Roman Empire, the costs were especially high. The manpower losses meant that future wars were underfunded and underdefended. Justinian's hold on Italy wavered. The Persian frontier became unstable. Barbarian kingdoms in the west gained ground. In many ways, the plague shifted the balance of power across the known world, and yet the empire endured. Though weakened, Byzantium survived its cultural, legal, and religious foundations, laying the groundwork for Orthodox Christianity and Eastern Europe's later development. But the dream of a restored Roman Empire that died in the plague pits of Constantinople, the plague of Justinian, reminds us of how a single biological event can unravel the work of centuries. It teaches us that civilization is not only vulnerable to swords and politics, but to microbes and fleas. And it shows us, time and again, how nature reclaims its place in history. Often, when we least expect it, this was not just a story of disease. It was a turning point in world history. In the middle of the 6th century, as the sun dimmed and the earth grew cold, it was not just the crops that failed, the human spirit faltered as well. Across Europe and the Near East, people stared into the endless grey skies and asked themselves the same question: had the end of the world arrived? The years following 536 AD were filled with natural calamity, famine, and plague. And for the average person in the medieval world, without science to explain volcanic ash or bacterias, Thule's horrors could only be understood through the lens of faith, fear, and superstition. Imagine being a peasant in a small village. The sun has not shone brightly for months. Your harvest has rotted. Your neighbors are dying of hunger. Then comes the plague, striking fast, leaving behind silence. To you, this is not a weather problem or a biological event. This is a sign from God. Many people of the time believed they were witnessing the apocalypse. The Bible foretold of famine, pestilence, and signs in the heavens. When the skies darkened, many thought it was the fulfillment of divine prophecy. Churches swelled with frightened worshippers. Bells rang out across cities and villages as calls to repentance. Fasts were declared. Processions marched through the streets. Mortification of the flesh, whipping, starving, or punishing oneself became common as people begged for God's mercy. But not all reactions were peaceful. Fear gave rise to blame. Some believed that heretics, foreigners, or even women were the cause of the divine wrath. In some areas, scapegoating led to violence, social breakdown, or witch hunts. People turned on each other, desperate to find someone to hold responsible for their suffering. Others turned inward. Monasteries became refuges. Those who could fled the cities and joined religious orders, hoping to escape death and find meaning in solitude. Some took vows of silence. Others spent their days in prayer, convinced that the world was nearing its final hour. And while faith comforted many, superstition filled the cracks left by understanding. Strange omens were reported, drains of blood, ghostly apparitions, animals behaving erratically, solar halos and atmospheric effects caused by ash clouds were seen as portents of doom. Dreams and visions were taken as divine messages. Every storm, eclipse, or strange illness became a sign that the heavens were angry. In this fearful world, a new culture of millenarianism emerged. This belief held that the end of the world or a great transformation was imminent. Traveling preachers walked the roads, declaring Judgment Day. Villagers built shrines and makeshift altars in fields, hoping to avert destruction. Entire communities fasted for days, while some sold everything they owned in preparation for the second coming. But fear wasn't the only response. In some quarters, faith grew stronger. Christian theology evolved during these years to offer meaning and hope amidst the darkness. New saints and martyrs became revered as protectors against famine and plague. Pilgrimages to sacred sites increased. The image of the Virgin Mary as a merciful intercessor became more widespread, offering people a divine figure of compassion amid their suffering. At the same time, art and storytelling changed. Mosaics, murals, and manuscripts from this period begin to show darker, more apocalyptic imagery. Death and the devil appear more frequently in art. Psalms and sermons emphasize not just God's love, but his wrath. A genre of cautionary tales grew in monasteries and churches, where monks copied chilling legends of sinners punished in the afterlife. These stories weren't entertainment, they were warnings. Even the built environment was shaped by these emotions. Churches became more fortified, symbols of refuge in a world that seemed to be unraveling. Bells rang constantly, not just to mark time, but to ward off demons and death. People hung relics on doors and wore charms made of bones or wood, believing these items could protect them from invisible forces. Interestingly, some communities interpreted the chaos as a trial, not a punishment, divine test of endurance and faith. In these places, rather than descend into despair, people banded together. They sang hymns, shared meager food supplies, and cared for the sick. This resilience, rooted in communal spirituality, became a cornerstone of medieval identity. As the decades passed and the skies cleared, people began to reflect on what had happened. The memory of those dark years was etched into folk songs, carved into stone, and passed down through oral legends. And though they didn't understand the science behind it, they knew something cosmic had happened, something that nearly broke the world. The fear, faith, and superstition of those years weren't signs of ignorance, they were signs of survival. In the absence of answers, people turned to what they had: stories, rituals, and belief. They found ways to live in the shadow of catastrophe. Today, we can look back with knowledge they didn't have. We know about volcanic eruptions, atmospheric cooling, and plague bacteria. But their emotional truth still resonates. When disaster strikes, humans search for meaning. And whether through prayer or poetry, through rituals or resilience, we always find ways to endure. Asterisk. In the 12th century, something remarkable began to rise from the heart of Europe's structures so tall, so intricate, and so awe-inspiring that they seemed to touch the heavens themselves. These were not just churches, they were Gothic cathedrals, and they would forever redefine the spiritual and physical landscape of medieval Europe. Before the Gothic style emerged, most of Europe's churches followed the Romanesque tradition by thick walls, small windows, and low, heavy roofs. These buildings were fortress-like, grounded, and dark. But as the High Middle Ages dawned, a new vision began to take shape. A vision of light, verticality, and divine harmony. This architectural revolution began in Ile-de-France, the region surrounding Paris. The man credited with its spark was Abbot Suzaire of the Abbey Church of Saint Denis. In the 1130s, Suzaire began reconstructing his abbey using an experimental new approach, inspired by theological ideas about light and divinity. He sought to create a space where earthly matter met heavenly light. What emerged was a new architectural language. Pointed arches replaced rounded ones, allowing for greater flexibility and height. Ribbed vaults distributed weight more efficiently, and, most iconically, flying buttresses were introduced, external supports that freed up the walls to be pierced with massive windows. And not just any window-stained glass windows, glowing with vibrant scenes from the Bible. Inside a Gothic cathedral, worshippers were no longer enclosed in shadow, they were bathed in color and light. The effect was overwhelming, intentional, and deeply symbolic. The church became a place where the material and spiritual worlds met. Columns rose like trees, vaults curved like heaven's dome, and light spilled in like grace itself. The innovation caught fire. Soon, Gothic cathedrals were rising in every major European city: Chartres, Reims, Amiens, Cologne, Salisbury, and beyond each was a marvel of engineering, artistry, and ambition. These structures weren't built in years, they took decades, even centuries. Entire generations worked under their spires, carving stone, fitting glass, and climbing ever higher. But these were more than just buildings. Gothic cathedrals were the heartbeat of medieval cities. They stood at the center of urban life, hosting markets, festivals, sermons, coronations, and even political assemblies. They reflected the power of the church, the wealth of the city, and the ingenuity of medieval craftsmen. And what craftsmanship it was! Every detail of a Gothic cathedral told a story. Carvings of saints, demons, angels, and animals lined the facades. Gargoyles served as waterspouts and as reminders of the dangers outside the sacred space. Tympanums over the doors depicted scenes of salvation and damnation. The architecture itself became a form of education for a largely illiterate population. Above all, these cathedrals reflected a new way of thinking. In their verticality and complexity, they symbolized the rising spirit of Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, a period marked by renewed intellectual life, scholastic philosophy, and growing urban centers. This was the time of universities, of Thomas Aquinas, of rediscovered classical texts. The Gothic cathedral was its architectural anthem. It also marked a shift in how time and effort were valued. Builders who laid the foundation stones would never see the spires completed. The work became a legacy of faith passed down from father to son, master to apprentice. It was architecture as devotion. But the Gothic style was not static. Over time, it evolved. Early Gothic gave way to High Gothic, taller, more elaborate, more daring. By the 14th century, flamboyant Gothic emerged in France with intricate tracery and decorative flourishes. In England, the perpendicular style emphasized vertical lines and fan vaults. Each region made the Gothic its own, yet all carried the same DNA, a striving toward the divine. Then came the 16th century and, with it, the Renaissance. The Gothic style was slowly replaced by classical symmetry and humanist ideals. Some Renaissance critics even dismissed Gothic as barbaric, a product of the so-called Dark Ages. But the cathedrals remained towering, enduring, and defying. Centuries later, Gothic architecture would experience a revival in the 19th century, as romantic thinkers and architects rediscovered its beauty and grandeur. Writers like Victor Hugo helped save cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris from ruin. New buildings, from London's Parliament to university halls in the US, echoed the Gothic style, proof that its spell had never truly faded. Today, Gothic cathedrals stand not just as relics of a distant past, but as living monuments to the creativity, faith, and determination of the medieval world. They are reminders that even in an age without modern machines, people could create something transcendent by hand, by will, by vision. They changed the face of Europe not only in stone and glass, but in the very way people saw themselves in relation to God, to time, and to beauty. In the heart of medieval Europe, stone began to rise, not just as walls, but as ambition carved in masonry. Massive cathedrals began piercing the sky, drawing the eyes of worshippers upward, lifting hearts and hopes toward heaven. But behind their spiritual grandeur was a story of engineering genius. This is the tale of how flying buttresses and ribbed vaults redefined what was possible in architecture and turned cold stone into light-filled miracles. Before the 12th century, most European churches were built in the Romanesque style, thick, fortress-like, dark. These buildings had heavy barrel vaults and small windows. The walls had to carry the full weight of the stone roof, which meant limited height and almost no room for light to pass through. They were strong, yes, but static, dim, and grounded. Then came a revolution, a subtle shift that would lead to some of the most stunning and iconic buildings in human history, the Gothic cathedrals. And that shift began with a simple but brilliant idea: spread the weight elsewhere. At the center of this transformation were two architectural marvels, the ribbed vault and the flying buttress. Let's start with the ribbed vault. Instead of constructing a solid stone ceiling like a barrel, builders began shaping intersecting pointed arches that formed a framework, a skeleton called ribs. These ribs didn't just look elegant, they channeled the weight of the ceiling downward and outward, directing it to specific points, columns, and piers rather than pressing evenly across thick walls. This was revolutionary. It meant cathedrals could now have higher ceilings, thinner walls, and more complex designs, all without sacrificing structural integrity. But even more importantly, it freed up space in the walls for something spectacular: windows. Now that the walls didn't need to support all the weight, builders could carve them open and fill them with glass. The result? Massive stained glass windows that bathed the interior in divine color and light. The ribbed vault made Gothic interiors soar and shimmer. But the ribbed vault alone wasn't enough to handle the outward thrust of such lofty ceilings. That's where the flying buttress came, in a unique solution that looked almost like a bridge between the cathedral and the heavens. From the outside, flying buttresses appear as arched stone arms extending from the upper walls to large piers. Beyond, these graceful supports did something extraordinary. They captured and redirected the outward force of the vaults and roof, and transferred it away from the main building. Think of it like pushing against a spring. Instead of letting the roof force the walls outward and collapse, the flying buttress catches that pressure and carries it safely down into the ground. It's a hidden strength, quiet, beautiful, and essential. And the best part, flying buttresses allowed builders to go higher, thinner, lighter, and brighter. The result was breathtaking. Gothic cathedrals no longer felt like caves of stone. They felt like floating sanctuaries, alive with color and sound. Light poured through massive rose windows and clerestories. Vaults soared overhead like the branches of a forest. Columns seemed to dissolve into the heavens. This was not just architecture, it was theology in stone. Every design choice had spiritual symbolism. The verticality of the structure pulled the eyes upward toward God. The colored light represented divine truth. The ribbed vaults, soaring gracefully above, mimicked the order and harmony of creation, and the complexity of the engineering itself was seen as a reflection of divine wisdom. These innovations also demanded a new kind of teamwork. Building a cathedral required not only masons and carpenters, but mathematicians, engineers, and visionary architects. Plans had to account for angles, pressures, and weather. Models were drawn, calculations made by hand. Often, these builders learned through trial, error, and inherited knowledge. What's astonishing is that all this was achieved without modern machinery. No steel cranes, no power tools, just ropes, pulleys, wood scaffolds, and human grit. Blocks of stone were hoisted hundreds of feet into the air. Ribs were set by hand, buttresses were measured by intuition and chalk, and still they stand today. One of the earliest examples of these innovations is the Cathedral of Sens, followed by masterpieces like Chartres, Amiens, and Reims. Each pushed the limits further, reaching for the divine. In England, cathedrals like Salisbury and Lincoln adopted and adapted the style, often with regional twists, showcasing the adaptability of this engineering language. But the most famous example is arguably Notre Dame de Paris. Its flying buttresses became architectural icons, so daring, so beautiful, that later generations would mistake them for decoration rather than necessity. Yet it was this combination of art and function that defined the Gothic miracle. These engineering breakthroughs didn't just change cathedrals, they changed cities, cultures, and consciousness. They proved that human beings could harness reason and imagination to reach toward the divine. They shaped the skylines of Europe and the spirit of the Middle Ages. Even today, in a world of glass skyscrapers and computer models, the ribbed vault and the flying buttress remain unmatched in elegance and purpose. They remind us that true innovation often comes not from replacing the past, but from rethinking it, from seeing stone not as a limit, but as a possibility. When we gaze upon the towering Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, it's easy to see only stone and glass, the final masterpiece. But behind these majestic structures lay something far richer, a living community of people whose skills, stories, and sweat shaped not just buildings, but entire societies. Building a cathedral was not a task for a single master or a handful of workers. It was a generational endeavor, requiring hundreds, sometimes thousands, of master masons, craftsmen, apprentices, laborers, and specialists. These men and women forged identities tied deeply to their work, forming guilds and traditions that lasted centuries. At the heart of this community was the master mason, the architect, engineer, and often the project leader. Unlike modern architects with blueprints and calculators, the master mason relied on experience, geometry, and intuition. His role combined artistry and practicality, designing complex vaults, managing the labor force, and solving structural challenges. His knowledge was sacred and passed on orally or through drawings and models. Apprenticeships could last years, often starting when boys were as young as 10 or 12. Apprentices learned everything from quarrying stone to carving intricate sculptures. Over time, they advanced to journeymen and eventually, if skilled enough, to master masons themselves. This system not only preserved architectural techniques, but created tight-knit communities bonded by craft. Craftsmen specialized in various trades. Stonecutters shaped limestone and sandstone into blocks or elaborate capitals. Carpenters built wooden scaffolds and hoisted massive stones skyward. Glassmakers fashioned stained glass that transformed light into stories. Blacksmiths forged tools and nails. Even painters and gilders decorated interiors with color and gold. These workers didn't just build buildings, they built lives. The cathedral site was a bustling economic center. Quarries supplied stone. Transporting materials involved entire networks of labor and trade. Local farmers provided food, merchants sold goods, and taverns served as meeting points for workers. In many towns, the cathedral was the largest employer and economic engine. Cathedral construction also fostered a sense of local pride and identity. People saw these structures as their own symbols of their town's faith, wealth, and prestige. The slow progress, spanning decades, meant that several generations grew up alongside the rising walls, sharing stories of their contributions. This deep connection gave rise to legends and folklore. Stories circulated of miraculous discoveries at the building site, buried relic, a vision, or an angel guiding the work. Tales of heroic masons who solved impossible challenges, or apprentice boys whose cleverness saved the day, became part of communal memory. These legends were retold around fires and in guild halls, enriching the cultural fabric. The work itself was dangerous and demanding. Falls from scaffolds, crushing injuries from heavy stones, and exhaustion were common. Yet, the camaraderie was strong. Workers shared meals, celebrated religious festivals together, and passed down knowledge. Guilds protected their members and maintained high standards, ensuring quality and safety. The social impact extended beyond the cathedral. These communities helped spread innovations in technology, design, and construction throughout Europe. Master masons traveled between sites, sharing ideas and techniques. This mobility contributed to the remarkable consistency and variety of Gothic architecture. Moreover, the cathedral's construction reinforced the medieval worldview, where faith and labor intertwined. Building a house for God was itself an act of worship. The physical effort reflected spiritual devotion. Every stone laid was a prayer, every carving a testament. As time passed, some cathedrals took centuries to complete. This slow pace was not just practical, it was spiritual. The unfinished nature of many cathedrals symbolized humility before the divine, and the ongoing journey of faith. Today, when we admire these stone giants, we honor not only their beauty, but the countless hands and hearts that built them. The Gothic cathedral is more than a church. It's a monument to human community, craftsmanship, and enduring faith. Livia Drusilla's story begins in the heart of the Roman Republic. In the year 58 BC, born into the prestigious Claudian family, one of Rome's oldest and most respected patrician houses. From her earliest days, Livia was groomed within the elite circles of Roman society, learning the art of politics, influence, and survival in a world dominated by powerful men. Her youth was shaped amid the turbulence of a fading republic. Political alliances shifted like sand, and families like hers navigated through civil wars and power struggles. At the tender age of 15, Livia was married to Tiberius Claudius Nero, a politician and military man aligned with Julius Caesar's opponents. Their union was typical of Roman aristocracy, a match to strengthen family alliances. However, Livia's destiny was about to change dramatically. In 39 BC, fate intervened when she met Octavian, the future emperor Augustus. Octavian was consolidating power following Julius Caesar's assassination and the chaotic aftermath. Despite being already married to Tiberius, Livia divorced and married Octavian in 38 BCE. Bold and strategic move that would alter the course of Roman history. Their marriage was not just a personal union, but a political partnership. Livia's presence brought stability and dignity to Octavian's household. Known for her intelligence, grace, and political acumen, she became a trusted advisor and confidant, while Augustus publicly projected his image as Rome's first emperor. It was Livia who worked behind the scenes to maintain alliances and influence key figures in the Senate and military. Livia's influence extended beyond the private sphere. She managed estates, controlled wealth, and engaged in patronage, using her resources to build loyalty. Roman historians describe her as a model of Roman virtue, modest yet formidable, a woman who wielded power through persuasion rather than open force. Her role as mother was equally pivotal. She raised two sons, Tiberius and Drusus, with a keen eye on political destiny. Her son Tiberius would later succeed Augustus as emperor, and many scholars believe Livia played an instrumental role in securing his succession, navigating the treacherous waters of imperial politics with skill and subtlety. Throughout Augustus' reign, Livia's influence grew. She was present at official ceremonies, consulted on state matters, and known to have swayed Augustus on critical decisions. Ancient writers such as Tacitus and Suetonius offer glimpses into her complex character, admiring her intelligence but also hinting at ruthlessness in protecting her family's interests. Her legacy is also immortalized in art and architecture. Livia commissioned buildings and gardens in Rome, reflecting both her status and her dedication to the city. The Villa of Livia, a countryside estate, remains a testament to Roman luxury and artistic taste, decorated with intricate frescoes symbolizing fertility and renewal. Yet, her life was not without controversy. Some sources suggest she may have orchestrated political eliminations to secure her family's power, though historians debate these claims. Regardless, her influence was undeniable. Upon Augustus' death in AD 14, she was granted the unprecedented title Augusta, officially recognized as the mother of the emperor and a revered figure in Roman society. Livia Drusilla's rise from patrician daughter to the power behind Rome's throne reflects the subtle but profound ways women could shape history in a male-dominated world. Through intelligence, political savvy, and unwavering determination, she carved a legacy that would influence the Roman Empire for generations. Livia Drusilla was far more than the wife of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. She was a master strategist and subtle power broker whose influence shaped the very foundation of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and determined the future of the Roman Empire. Through decades of political maneuvering, Livia worked behind the scenes to manipulate succession, consolidate authority, and guide Rome's most turbulent era. The Roman political landscape was rife with danger and ambition. Augustus' reign. though establishing peace after years of civil war, lacked a clear system for imperial succession. Unlike a monarchy, the emperor's title was not strictly hereditary, and many rivals eyed the throne. Into this uncertainty stepped Livia, wielding her keen intelligence and vast network of alliances. Central to Livia's influence was her son, Tiberius. From her first marriage, though Augustus had biological sons from previous unions, none survived. Into adulthood, Augustus initially favored his grandsons by his daughter Julia, but as political tides shifted, Livia tirelessly promoted Tiberius as the rightful heir. Ancient historians suggest Livia used both diplomacy and intrigue to secure Tiberius's position. She reportedly fostered alliances with senators, generals, and imperial officials, ensuring her son's path to power remained clear. Some sources hint at darker deeds, rumors of poisoning rivals or undermining political opponents, but these remain debated by scholars. Beyond Tiberius, Livia also guided the broader Julio-Claudian family dynamics. She managed relationships between Augustus, his grandsons, and other relatives, smoothing tensions that might have led to open conflict. Her ability to navigate complex family politics was key to the dynasty's early stability. Livia's political acumen extended into the imperial court. She was known to advise Augustus on state matters, influencing appointments and policies subtly, but decisively. Her reputation as a pious and virtuous woman masked a shrewd understanding of power dynamics. In many ways, Livia's role exemplified the power of influence without official authority, though women could not hold political office. In Rome, they wielded power through family, patronage, and counsel. Livia became the archetype of the imperial matron who shaped policy from the shadows. Her legacy endured well beyond Augusta's death in AD 14. As the first Roman woman to be granted the title Augusta, Livia maintained significant prestige and influence during the reigns of Tiberius and subsequent emperors. She was revered not just as mother of the emperor, but as the matriarch of the empire. Livia's life and political maneuvering also set precedents for later imperial women, from Agrippina the Younger to Julia Domna, who similarly wielded power behind the throne. Her story reveals the complex interplay of gender, family, and politics in ancient Rome. Despite controversy and speculation about her methods, historians agree that Livia's strategic mind and unyielding will help consolidate the Julio-Claudian dynasty's hold on power during a fragile period. Through careful alliance building, subtle manipulation, and a profound understanding of Roman politics, Livia shaped an empire not through armies or laws, but through influence and legacy. Livia Drusilla's journey did not end with her death. Instead, it took a remarkable turn, one that transformed a mortal woman into a figure of divine worship, legend, and enduring influence. This is the story of how Livia's legacy evolved, from a powerful Roman matron to a deified goddess and cultural symbol, reshaping the way women in power were perceived for centuries to come. When Livia died in AD 29, the Roman world was already deeply entwined with her influence. Her son, Emperor Tiberius, and the ruling Julio-Claudian dynasty ensured her memory was honored. But it was under her great-grandson, Claudius, and later emperors that her status grew beyond mortal bounds. In AD 42, Livia was officially deified by the Roman Senate, receiving the title Diva Augusta. This posthumous honor placed her among the gods, a rare privilege that reflected her extraordinary impact on the empire. Temples were dedicated to her worship, statues erected, and festivals held in her name. Deification was not merely an act of political flattery. It was a profound statement about the intertwining of divine authority and imperial power. Livia's transformation into a goddess symbolized the sanctity of the Julio-Claudian line and reinforced the idea that the emperor's family was touched by the divine. Yet, the mythology around Livia also grew. Ancient writers and artists began to depict her with attributes of fertility, wisdom, and protector of the state. She became a symbol of ideal womanhood, modest, intelligent, yet commanding respect and authority. Her image was used to inspire loyalty and moral conduct, especially among women. This process of myth-making also included darker, more mysterious elements. Some sources portrayed Livia as a cunning manipulator, femme fatale, whose ambition extended into the supernatural. Rumors of poisonings and political intrigue colored her legacy. Whether fact or fiction, these stories contributed to her complex and compelling persona. Historically, Livia's deification and mythologization had broader implications for perceptions of women in power. In a society where women could not rule outright, the divine honors bestowed upon her provided a model for female authority, linked to sanctity and maternal influence rather than direct political control. This duality between venerated goddess and feared schemer would echo through history. Later, empresses and powerful women in Rome and beyond were often framed through the lens of Livia's legacy, celebrated for virtue yet scrutinized for ambition. Beyond Rome, Livia's story influenced art, literature, and culture across centuries. Renaissance artists rediscovered her statues and portraits, inspiring depictions of noble Roman women. Enlightenment thinkers debated her role in shaping empire and gender norms. Even modern historians grapple with her complex identity as both ruler and myth. In the end, Livia Drusilla's transformation from mortal woman to goddess reflects the enduring power of legacy. It shows how history blends with myth, how power intertwines with divinity, and how the stories we tell shape the roles women play in society. Livia's life and legend remind us that influence often transcends time, not just through deeds, but through the stories, symbols, and ideals we pass down. From mortal to goddess, she remains a potent figure in the history of women's power and empire.